tutorial starts with a song. Let's get started with animation. Hi folks, I'm so full with ideas about new tutorials, about specific things, but from time to time we need to take a rest and say hello to the people who are new to Maya, who've never seen that program before, or who have seen the program before but are overwhelmed by all these icons. About 100 already on the opening screen. So let me make a brief round here and show you in a circle more or less what this is about, so you can get started with Maya. If you're advanced or know all about the interface or most things about the interface, just skip this tutorial and till next Tuesday. Okay, hello beginners, we are here to show you some things. Up here you have menus, and the menus are always linked to this pull down menu here. The first ones stay the same more or less, I think these ones, but when you go from modeling to say animation, you see these things here change. Now we have key, cache, Arnold, whatever, and if we go to rendering, we have texturing, lighting and shading, and tune, etc. So depending on what you're actually working with, for example, building something using modeling, then you find the mesh, which is a word for polygon modeling, and the curves and surfaces, which stands for NURBS modeling. You can deform objects, etc. So this menu is very crucial. If you miss anything here up here because you want to do something later on when you're more experienced with it, always check here. If you want to rig a skeleton, rigging has to do with building bones into geometry, then you need the rigging menu here, menu set, for example, for creating a skeleton. I don't want to intimidate you here by opening the skeleton menu. All the menus are very big, and all in all, if you have the whole collection of the menus here, you have about 1,000 menu entries and options. Steve Jobs, one of the Apple founders, once called it the most complex program in the world. That was when it was ported from Linux and Windows to macOS. Okay, this is the menu, this is the rigging, whatever. Here you have lots of icons which you can use all the time, more or less, like saving, etc., which is not really usable for most people because we use this menu here, and this is the only menu I show you today, where you can create a new scene, open a scene, save scene, etc., optimize the scene size. These tabs here are important because they make certain things very sexy. For example, if you want to create a polygon plane, you can just click here and the plane appears on that surface. The alternative would be to use one of the modules up here under Create. I'm not going to show you that. Often the right mouse button here helps to find more entries, such as right mouse button, the super ellipse, which is this thing here. We don't care about what it is. But these tabs here are shortcuts with nice, in most cases, nice icons in order to get to things quickly. For example, if you go to XGen, you have a green layout, and when you go to curves and surfaces, that's the NURBS world, you have all these icons here in blue. So switch from one tab to the next depending on what you want to do. Now the next thing is this part here is important for rendering. That means rendering means you have built a scene, set a light, and then you want to see a sort of final result, how it looks in that light, the geometry you just created. And for that you need to add a light, of course, and under Create, for example. And then you use one of these icons here, and I'm not going to go into details what they mean, but basically this is a section for rendering. Start with this one first and then go to this one, for example, IPR, which gives you an interactive way of rendering here. Let's move over here. This is how you log into your account. Once you're logged in, your name appears here, and up here is the workspace. The workspace is the whole layout of the whole scene, and when you use the pull down menu, you can use modeling standard, modeling expert, sculpting, etc., which I don't want to use, and I normally don't use these things because you can construct the menus by yourself. For example, by picking outliner, which is like a collection of things in the scene, the supersphere here, and the plane, which is hidden. You can just move it somewhere else, drag it out here, and move it back if you like. So it's a very highly sensitive piece of interface here. Sometimes I get confused with these things. Now we're here. The right part gives us information about this geometry. This is the selection of objects we have in the scene. For example, certain cameras here and light sets, whatever that means. And on the right hand side you have the specifics of these objects. For example, the rotation in Y, and the axes are depicted here. Y always goes up in Maya. So if you want to, for example, scale this in Y from 1 to 4, you just type in 4 and you have it scaled 4 units wide, high, basically. Press Ctrl A, you get the so-called attribute editor, which is much more complex and where you all of a sudden see that this object is constructed in several ways and by several means, and you can do so many things here, which I don't want to show you. All I want to show you is this tab here. So if you just move from one tab to another, here you see the 4 again. That's the 4 we just typed in. That's the scale 4. Now it's in a more complex view here. But this one is interesting because in most cases when you create a new object, you have options here. And the options are very complex and you need to find your way into that. For example, the random button, which is unique to these super objects here. When you press that, you create variations of that object here. By the way, when you hover the mouse in this area here and press the key F, you jump to that object. And so these things, this is called the attribute editor. You need it all the time in order to go into the specifics of modeling or doing certain things here. When we press Ctrl A again, we get that smaller entry here. Now let's go down here. Here we have the animation controls. We don't have an animation in the scene, but we can create an animation. And the typical thing to do is you press the key W. The letter W does not relate to anything here, but on the keyboard, if you have a look at your keyboard, you have Q, W, E and R next to each other. And W means translation. That means you move your object from one place to another. E is rotation and R is scaling. So if you press the key W, you get these arrows here. And for example, you can move this over here and maybe a little bit down. And that's how you translate these objects. When you press the key E, you can rotate it. And when you press the key R, you can scale it, like make it thicker. That's the same thing which we just did here by entering exact values. And this is the animation timeline. We're currently at frame 1. When you start an animation, you start with keyframes. So you with this slider here, you're at frame 1 and you press S. That makes this red. And now you go to frame, say, 70 and you make it bigger, and that's the key W now, and you move it over here and up here, and you set another keyframe by pressing S. You have a second red stroke here, and now you can go to the beginning, and now you see the animation and you stop it. It does not work with the spacebar because the spacebar is used for another thing. I hover the mouse over here and I press and hold the spacebar, and then you get the whole menu section right here and lots of other entries here which you can use while working with Maya. And the animation is basically sitting down here. This is just the range of the animation here. You can type in numbers like 3000, so you can change the whole animation to a much longer length. Down here you have the Mel scripting line, which you don't need as a beginner because it's for special interests and for things which you cannot basically do with all these menus here. And down here is the so-called status line, and the status line tells you what a certain command might be about. For example, if I hover the mouse over here, I see down there NURBS sphere, create a NURBS sphere on the grid. That means if I click here, I create a NURBS, which is that very nice and round thing here. Right mouse click on the object gives us lots of other menus, and the most important one is this: assign a new material. And here you assign a new material, so you make it, for example, more shiny. I don't want to go into this now. The spacebar, if you press it briefly, hovering the mouse over here, briefly, then you switch from this view here to a 4, layout of 4. And when you, for example, hover the mouse over here and press the space bar briefly, you get a look from the top, and it fills the whole user interface really. Press it again, the space bar briefly, and hover the mouse over here briefly, then you're back. That makes switching from all the orthogonal views here back to the perspective view very fast, and you often need the orthogonal windows, as they are called. Okay, now we're here. Guess what this means? Well, it makes a little bit more space because it minimizes the outliner. Here you have something which has to do with the layout. If you want to see things side by side, this is the icon to use, and this is the 4 icon we just used, and this is the main perspective view here. This means you're looking through a perspective camera. It's an actual camera here in 3D, although we don't see the camera, but we can visualize the camera by other means, and I don't want to show you that, but basically this is our camera. We look through that camera now. And if you want to see what the camera finally renders, what the camera sees for final output, it's not going to be this section here, because this is changing all the time, different formats, etc. And that's what you need this menu set for. It's not related to this one, it's a special one, and it's unique to this window here, whereas these are unique to the whole Maya interface. And if you want to have a precise look from your camera view to that format, for example, you need to go to View and then Camera Settings down here and Resolution Gate, and then you get this. This is very special already, but it's basically showing you that these menu entries are specific to this part of our user interface. And finally we go here. These things are what I just showed you in on the keyboard. This is Q, the key Q. It does the same thing as clicking here. It means don't go into any scaling, moving, rotation. Just let me select things. So I select things right here. Whereas when I go here, I make a lasso selection. I can select all these objects, for example, or just this object. Doesn't make sense a lot in this tiny scene here. And this is switching to the components. The components give me options to actually change things on a component scale. For example, when I press the key W again and I select this point here, I can move it up. And if you want to go back to the normal mode, the so-called object mode, you need to press the key F8. So you're in component mode currently, press the key F8 and then you're back to the object selection. So basically this is F8. And there's so many shortcuts here. This is for rotation and this is for scaling. The most important thing is to find your way around in the scene. And I did a tutorial for beginners about the specifics of navigation in the scene. They all work with the Alt key. The Alt key and the left mouse button does this. And it depends on what you've actually selected and framed your camera to. For example, if I move this object out here and I press the key F, which frames my object, then I turn around, I rotate around my virtual camera, the perspective camera, around that object, and I see that in the distance now, the super ellipse. If you want to see all objects, you press the key A, and when you do the rotation thing with the Alt and left mouse button, now you rotate around basically every object in the scene. If you have 1000 objects in the scene, you rotate around the center of all these objects. If you press the middle mouse key with the Alt key together, you do this. It doesn't rotate, it doesn't go closer or anything, it just moves the whole scene in a flat way. And here is the right mouse button. Can also do this with a mouse wheel if I have a mouse wheel. So you get closer to it or further away. Well, this is all I wanted to show you today. I hope you're not too bored or overwhelmed, and I wish you a good day. Until next time.